Bonds Beyond the Herd by Elton Gar. Tarum tried to push himself to his feet. He got one of his feet under him, but the other three just didn't seem to work right. He pushed upward with his head and trunk as he heard the distressed sound of his mother. He knew that he needed to get to his feet. The herd needed to move on. He tried 3 more times, but each time he became more exhausted than the last. Even when his mother put her trunk around him to help, he barely made it to his feet, and after only a couple of steps, he collapsed. The other elephants rumbled, and there were several trumpets, and then he felt them begin to move away, leaving him and his mother alone because if they didn't, the entire herd could die. Over the next few hours, he struggled to get up. All the time his mother grew more upset. Then 4 strange, 2-legged creatures appeared. Tarum's mother moved between him and the strange creatures. Tarum tried to move behind his mother, but he couldn't get to his feet. There was a loud sound, and then a few minutes later his mother slowly laid down next to him. After that, he heard another loud sound, and then there was a prick of pain and he began to feel tired. The next days were a blur. He found himself in a loud machine, ropes holding him down as it swayed. Then he woke up inside a small, enclosed area. His mother stood next to him eating hay and watching him. She made a soft, comforting rumble when he was awake, but he fell back asleep. He woke again in a metal room. There were several 2-legged creatures around him, and he listened to them. The noises they made were as varied as those his herd made, but he didn't understand any of them. What he understood was that when one of them saw he was awake, she put her hand on his side lightly and then put something into his mouth. For a moment, he thought she was hurting him, but then he tasted it. It was milk, and though he couldn't get to his feet like he would prefer, he drank it greedily, enjoying one of the first meals he had ever had. They gave him more every time he roused, and as his mother began to trust the 2 legs' intentions, they helped him to reach her so that she could feed him. His mother calmed after that, and the other elephants, none of whom were from his herd, began to check on them. They would walk by and speak to his mother, and the matriarch even put her head against his mother's, helping to calm her. All Tarum wanted to do was walk, but after almost a week he had only stumbled to his feet once, and he was too weak to keep his feet for more than a few seconds. As he collapsed in exhaustion, his mother made a triumphant cheer. He had finally done it. But it was the 2-leg who put one of her trunks around him and then gave him another drink. It helped with the exhaustion, but he still fell asleep. He heard the 2-legged woman talking to someone else. He didn't understand much, but he could hear worry in her tone, and a hint of anger. He woke up once more in a metal room. He was on a table, and there were people all around him. The woman, wearing something white over her face, put her hand gently on his side, and then there was a poke. He had gotten almost used to that, but he was too tired to protest even if he hadn't. And the world went black. Maya watched the elephant as its breath grew more shallow. She then glanced at the instruments that tracked his heartbeat and oxygen. It was all normal, but she had spent so much time worrying about Tarum that she couldn't just turn that off. She also wasn't sure she agreed with the plan. But whether she liked it or not, they had done everything they could to allow him to survive normally, and if they didn't intervene with something more dramatic, he would die. An elephant couldn't survive with the genetic problems that Tarum had, so they would take the opportunity to change his genetics. That had always been what Dr. Blackwood had wanted.
I'm still not convinced this is going to do anything but prolong his suffering,
Maya said. She had worked with elephants for years and saw something special in Tarum, but as much as she wanted what was best for him, she wasn't sure that the best option wouldn't be to increase the amount of painkillers until he just fell asleep.
I can't guarantee it will work, but we've determined what the flaws are and have a way to fix them. Would you let him die instead?
It wasn't as easy a question as she wished it was, but she understood too much about genetics to not have real reservations. Not just because of what it could do to Tarum, but because the genetic changes would be passed on to the elephant gene pool if he had children, and there weren't enough elephants for that to not matter. But just as she was considering telling him to stop, Tarum's eye flickered open, and his trunk stretched out and wrapped around her arm for a few seconds. She squeezed it reassuringly, and as it squeezed back and then fell away, she knew she would do anything to keep him alive. Every day was hard for Tarum, but every day it was a bit easier. He felt hungry, but he found that most days he could reach his feet long enough to suckle, and soon he took a few steps. His mother trumpeted as he did, and several of the other elephants responded in the same, moving quickly to see him. He felt pride for the first time, even as he lay on the ground exhausted. Tarum's world began to expand as his strength slowly grew. He watched the two-legged creatures as they moved around him, speaking in their strange, varied tones. At first, the sounds were just a cacophony to him, but as time passed, he began to pick up patterns and understand that the different tones meant different things. One day, Maya approached him with a piece of fruit in her hand.
Tarum.
She said, looking into his eyes, she said,
Something apple. Something food.
She held out the fruit to him, and he extended his trunk to take it. The sensation of the apple's skin against his trunk was new, and as he brought it to his mouth, he experienced a burst of flavors he had never encountered before. Sweet and tart mingled in his mouth, and he let out a pleased rumble. As days turned into weeks, Tarum's interactions with the humans became more intentional. Maya started using hand gestures along with her words, and each day he understood more of her words. Then one day something seemed to click, and he understood. Maya was making the gestures because she wanted him to talk back to her. And since he couldn't make the same strange sounds that they could, she wanted him to make the gestures. So he made the sign for apple. Maya seemed excited, but then she hurried off. A minute later, she returned with an apple. Days turned into a captivating dance of discovery for Tarum. His interactions with Maya deepened as he grasped the concept of sign language. With patience and persistence, Tarum learned to convey his desires through gestures. As he sat one day beneath the shade of a towering tree, Maya approached with an assortment of tools. Tarum's curiosity piqued as he observed her movements. She took a long stick and drew a pattern in the dirt, a circle with several lines protruding from it like rays of sunshine. Then she pointed at the stick, then at the pattern, and back at him, a questioning expression on her face. Tarum's mind raced as he tried to comprehend her message. Then, a spark of understanding ignited within him. Tools. She was referring to tools. With a sense of achievement, he used his trunk to grasp the stick she had indicated. He hesitated for a moment before attempting to mimic her earlier gesture, drawing the pattern in the dirt. Maya's face lit up with astonishment. She clapped her hands softly and nodded at Tarum, confirming his interpretation. From that moment on, Tarum's interactions with the world expanded as he experimented with various tools. He used sticks to scratch itchy spots, branches to reach leaves just out of his trunk's reach, and rocks to play with in the water. Some of the other elephants did the same, swatting away flies or covering a water hole, but Tarum sometimes saw better ways to do the same thing, things that the others seemed to miss. It wasn't long before the other humans noticed something unique about Tarum. Not only was he learning to communicate through sign language, but he was also demonstrating an ability to adapt and problem-solve using tools. They would watch him for hours, sometimes using their tools that let them see him from a long way away, and other times approaching him, though it was always Maya who helped to teach him. But while she taught him words for foods and toys he liked, she forgot one of the most important. So finally, frustrated, he took his stick and drew his own symbol. It was a two-leg with long hair like Maya. He then pointed at it with the stick, and then pointed at her, just as she had done when teaching him a symbol. Maya sat down in the dirt. Tarum didn't fully understand why, but he was a bit tired himself, so he sat next to her, carefully leaning against her. He had grown enough. He had to be careful with the small two legs, but Maya was part of his herd, and he wasn't going to give up being next to her just because he had to be careful. After a few minutes, Maya looked at one of the cameras, then used the stick to erase the symbol that Tarum had drawn and said,
You have to be careful. Dr. Blackwood is beginning to suspect something, and what you did should be impossible. You have to keep it a secret from everyone. So please wait until we're alone.
Tarum didn't fully understand, but he trusted Maya, so he reached out with his trunk and rubbed it against the dirt, erasing the last parts of the symbol. Then, because it was a bit sunny out, he took some dirt and threw it on his back, not thinking about leaning against Maya, so the dirt covered her as well. She laughed and said,
I probably deserved that. What do you want me to bring tomorrow?
Tarum thought about it, then pointed at the spot where he had drawn the symbol of Maya. He enjoyed the treats and toys, but more than that, he enjoyed spending time with Maya and learning. Even more than his mother often, because while his mother often told him that she loved him and could teach him many things that Maya didn't, like how to cover himself in dirt to protect himself, and how to drink out of the watering hole without stirring up the unhealthy parts on the bottom, there were so many things she didn't understand that Maya did. Maya patted him on the side of the trunk and said,
You couldn't keep me away if you tried.
That confused Tarum. He didn't know why he would want to keep her away. But she often said confusing things. Perhaps you had to be a two-leg to understand some of them. From then on, Maya almost never brought him inside. Instead, they would take long walks out into the fields where the other elephants spent most of their time. They would often come over to say hello, or make the deep calls that Maya and the other two legs couldn't hear. But mostly, it was just Tarum and Maya. She spent those trips talking. Sometimes she spent long periods of time talking with words that Tarum didn't understand, but even then he was able to pick up some words. One day, as Tarum and Maya sat under the setting sun, Tarum raised his trunk and gestured toward the sky. Then he pointed at the sun and drew a circle in the air, his eyes fixed on Maya. She seemed confused, so he made the symbol for light and then pointed at the sky again, the first stars beginning to appear. Maya's expression shifted from surprise to realization.
You're asking about the stars?
She mused aloud. She looked up at the sky and then back at Tarum, her eyes gleaming with admiration.
Yes, Tarum, those are stars. They're far away like our sun, but so far away we don't know much about them. But there are other worlds around them, and many of us believe that there must be other intelligent life out there. Perhaps looking makes us feel less alone. Because we were the only species on Earth capable of asking the question about what is out there.
As the sun dipped below the horizon, Tarum watched the stars emerge, their distant light a testament to the vastness of the world around him. He wondered if there was anyone like him out there, because he was becoming more sure every day that he was alone in this world. Those who were physically like him were family, but they didn't understand him, and he didn't think they ever would. And then there were the two legs. Maya understood so much, and they had long conversations where he asked questions and learned about the world. But she didn't understand what it was like to be in a herd, or the joy of spraying water on your ears. And she didn't let him talk to anyone else, because she said it would be dangerous for people to know who he was. So as the last sliver of the sun slipped behind the ground, he took one of the sticks and began to write on the ground. He was still bad with letters. They were hard to write, so he did it rarely, and he didn't know how to spell much, but he was able to put down the word leave. Maya looked at the ground for a minute and then said,
I don't think it's a good idea. At least not until you're an adult.
Tarum knew that Maya was smarter than him, but he also knew that he wanted to see everything. He wanted to see the places that Maya talked about. He wanted to visit his mother's herd, the one that had been forced to let them go and tell them it was okay. He wanted to see the great cities. Mostly, he wanted to see the people. Herds of millions, all living together, even though most of them didn't know any of the others. It didn't make any sense to him, but he hoped if he could see it that he would understand. But the next day, it wasn't Maya who came to see him. It was Dr. Blackwood. He was tall for a two-legged with pale skin. He wore a white coat that hung to his knees and had a clipboard. He smiled at Tarum, but that smile only made Tarum more suspicious as he said, Please come inside.
We have things to discuss.
Tarum ignored Dr. Blackwood and pulled some leaves off one of the branches and stuck them into his mouth and began to chew. They didn't taste as good as the food he usually ate, but it was what the other elephants spent most of their time eating, and he could pretend if he had to.
There is no point in pretending. I've been watching you for almost a year. I have hundreds of hours of video. You're as smart as anyone. Perhaps smarter, since your brain is twice the size of a human's.
Dr. Blackwood said. Tarum ate slowly, doing his best to pretend that the two-leg wasn't there at all. But Dr. Blackwood didn't seem willing to accept it, and said,
I can be stubborn too. Do you want me to get out the shock rod?
He had only seen the rods a couple of times when one of the bull elephants got out of control. So far as he could see, they were quite painful but didn't actually hurt them. That might have made it worse. Unwilling to admit that he understood, he took another branch, put it in his mouth, and then began to walk in the general direction of the building. The other elephants would go with the humans if asked, so there was no risk in that. There was a TV set up inside. Tarum didn't watch TV often since the other elephants didn't find it interesting, and so it was best for him to not find it interesting as well. But this time it was in a place where he could barely ignore it as he followed the simple directions and put his head over the fence that cut off that part of the room. Before he understood what was happening, there was a shackle around his back foot and another around his neck attaching to the bar. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it made it all but impossible for him to move. He wanted to pull, to show Dr. Blackwood just how much stronger his experiments had made Tarum. But the other elephants were far too trusting of anyone who gave them food, and Dr. Blackwood made sure to feed them all just often enough to keep that trust. So doing anything but standing here and waiting would confirm what Dr. Blackwood wanted to know. Once Tarum had no way to move, the doctor turned on the TV. It was a video of Tarum. The video showed him interacting with Maya, using tools, even making attempts at the sign language they had been practicing. Tarum could sense the unease growing within him, a deep discomfort at the realization that his private moments were being exploited. Dr. Blackwood leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, and a smug smile played across his lips.
"Impressive, isn't it?"
he remarked, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction.
"You've made remarkable progress, Tarum. I'm sure the world will be fascinated by what you can do. With your abilities and my guidance, we can change the perception of the animal world forever. I can make people think you're almost human."
Tarum felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. He was being used, manipulated into a pawn in Dr. Blackwood's grand scheme. His heart pounded in his chest, and he fought to find a way to convey his thoughts without explicitly revealing his understanding of the situation. "I don't want," Tarum signed in the air. He pointed at the screen, then at himself, his eyes locking onto Dr. Blackwood's. Dr. Blackwood chuckled patronizingly.
"You're doing it right now, Tarum. Communicating. Showing the world how you almost understand us."
Tarum's frustration grew, but he held his ground. He pointed at the screen again, then mimicked, locking his lips shut with an imaginary key. The doctor's smile wavered slightly, his eyes narrowing.
"You think you can just shut yourself off? You're a valuable discovery, Tarum. There's no turning back now."
Tarum's determination intensified. He knew he needed to resist Dr. Blackwood's control. Maya didn't like the man, and more than that, she believed that people knowing about Tarum would be dangerous. He gestured towards the door, then at himself, then shook his head. Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened.
"You're refusing to cooperate? You don't understand the position you're in, Tarum. I have the power to make your life comfortable or very uncomfortable, and no one else who matters knows you even exist."
Tarum's eyes met Dr. Blackwood's with a defiant intensity. He made the motion of writing on the ground with his finger, then pointed at the door again. He had to find a way to get back to Maya, to let her know what was happening. Dr. Blackwood's gaze held Tarum's for a moment longer, before he let out a frustrated sigh.
"Fine. You can wait here, and think about the value of cooperation."
Dr. Blackwood left the room, leaving Tarum's foot and neck chained so he couldn't move. He had to find a way to communicate his situation to Maya, before things spiraled out of control. He examined his surroundings, searching for any means of escape. The shackle on his leg seemed formidable, but his problem-solving skills gave him hope. Over the next few hours, Tarum focused his efforts on trying to manipulate the lock mechanism of the shackle. It took time, patience, and many failed attempts, but his determination never wavered. Finally, the shackle opened with a soft click. With his leg free, he was able to pull the wooden fence apart easily. Any elephant could do that if they tried hard enough. Tarum moved stealthily through the facility, as stealthy as an elephant could be, careful not to shake the ground as he walked. He knew where the cameras were and avoided those places. But he also hurried. He had to find Maya. As he neared Maya's living quarters, his heart raced. He used his trunk to tap on the window gently, hoping she would notice. After a few moments, the curtains shifted, and Maya's eyes met his. Surprise, concern, and relief played across her features as she pointed at the door. A large lock had been attached to the outside of the door, making it impossible for Maya to get out. They had tried to capture her too. Angry, Tarum took several steps back, then signed in the air for Maya to move away. She did, and once he couldn't see her anymore, he ran as fast as he could, ramming his head against the wooden door. The door split in half, splinters of wood breaking apart as he smashed into it. And a few seconds later, Maya stepped through the broken door. She said,
"We can't stay here."
Tarum looked towards the herd, where his mother and the others were. He knew that they couldn't go with them. So instead he knelt down. Maya seemed confused, so he used his trunk to nudge her onto his back. He had grown to be many times her size, and so having her on his back was no burden, and he began to run as fast as he could. That was something he had never done before, and he could move faster than any of the elephants in his herd.
"You never told me you could do that."
Maya said. Tarum signed as he went. He said, "I was made stronger." He was still fairly limited in his signing. He couldn't use normal sign language because those were based on 5 fingers and 2 hands, but he could speak some while moving. As they went, he began to wonder where they were going. But it was Maya who spoke. She said,
I was wrong. As long as you hide who you are, then people like Dr. Blackwood can use that to control you. He planned to convince people you were just a very intelligent animal, and since they'd never see you in person, it would be all but impossible for you to prove that you're more than that. The rest of the world needs to know what I do. Not everyone will accept you, but I think enough will to make it impossible for Blackwood or anyone else to control you. At least not in the way he wants.
Tarum had never considered that Maya could be wrong, but as the possibility struck him, he realized that as much as he wanted to see the cities and the monuments, as much as he wanted to understand the huge numbers of humans, what he wanted more than that was to connect to them, to understand them in an attempt to understand himself. By the time they reached the edge of the village, he was more excited than scared. And as people began to circle around him and Maya, he couldn't help but rumble with enjoyment, forgetting for a moment the danger. Maya spent some time introducing Tarum to the people. It turned out that this village was her herd. Her mother lived in it, as did several young two-legs who were her nieces and nephews. And all of them knew who Tarum was, though Maya had kept his intelligence secret even from her herd. They didn't stay long. There were no trucks large enough for Tarum, so they planned to walk across the empty countryside, avoiding the roads so that it would be harder to find him. As they prepared to leave, the people of the village began to bring out things for Maya. There were bags of food, clothes, and anything else she might need for the long trip. Most of them ignored Tarum, but one of the young girls, probably no older than Tarum himself, went into her home and came out with a handmade doll. It had been sewn together with care and was stuffed with straw that also made up its head, arms, and legs. The girl hugged the doll to her chest, then walked up to Tarum and said,
This is Maggie. She'll protect you.
She held out the doll. Tarum almost didn't take it. The idea of taking the girl's doll felt wrong, but to turn it down felt just as bad, so he took it carefully with his trunk and then passed it up to Maya. Once that was done, he carefully wrapped his trunk around the young girl and lifted her off the ground a couple of times. She was thin, and yet she cried out with laughter as he did it. When he put her down, he decided that this time Maya really was right. He couldn't keep hiding who he was. So he tried something he had only ever tried alone, hiding it even from Maya. It was slow and nowhere near perfect, but he slowly formed the words.
Thank you.
Everyone stopped and turned and looked at him. Even Maya, and then she said,
Well, that should make things easier. The trip is going to take a few weeks. Now give the girl back her doll.
Tarum chuckled and handed the girl back her doll and began to walk out of the village. This was going to be an adventure that he'd enjoy.
Author's note. Over the last few months, I've been watching videos from the Sheldrick Trust on YouTube. They are a group that rescues orphaned elephants and helps them get back to the wild. The videos are both a bit heartbreaking and also a lot of fun to watch because they almost all start with a baby elephant losing its mother. But then you get to see the animals bounce back. And there is little cuter in the world than a baby elephant. Among other things, their intelligence caught my attention. I'm no expert on elephants, but they are clearly an intelligent species and one that has a brain considerably bigger than humans. That, along with my enjoyment of the Uplift Saga by David Brin, led me to want to write this. While I've written stories about intelligent animals before, I still enjoy it. And I hope you do as well. If you do, you can sign up for my newsletter at www.ansci-fi.com. Just follow the link that says Free Book. Alternatively, you can sign up for my Patreon. At any level, you'll get access to all of my short stories, including Patreon exclusives, and get to vote on which future Patreon exclusive stories I will write. Thank you. Elton Gar.